Hi, I'm Matt Long. This is my movie review project. The two movies I chose were The War Game and The Day After. I'd like to start with a synopsis of both films, and then I'll talk about comparisons and contrast between the two, and then the feeling and themes and goals over both the films. The first film, The War Game, is a what-if documentary made by Peter Watkins in 1965 for the BBC. The film was viewed once in London on April 13, 1966, and then was shelved for nearly 2 decades for being considered too intense and violent for public viewing. It basically is a look at life just before, during, and after a nuclear attack on Britain. The narrator begins by discussing evacuation plans and effects of radiation in the event of a nuclear detonation. Various distances are described and the effects that would occur on people, livestock, and buildings. The next part of the film discusses various situations that would occur in the aftermath immediately following an attack. Doctors would be forced to separate survivors into 3 different categories, the first 2 being treatable, with the third category being people with burns over 50% of their body, who are basically SOL and untreatable. Police squads would be sent to put down these Category 3 victims, as they would be seen as a mercy compared to letting them suffer and die from their burns. Corpse disposal crews would need to be established to remove bodies that would be everywhere, and they would need to either burn or bury them to prevent spread of disease. Within 5 weeks, even more people would die from direct radiation poisoning. Even more people would become severely apathetic after 3 months following the attack due to emotional trauma. The next part of the film shows the government trying to reestablish control and help survivors by offering them welfare programs and establishing citizens and survivors with essentials. They did admit that there would most likely be food riots and looting, which police forces would need to reestablish swift and extreme punishment through firing lines to kind of make people realize that they're still in control. The film also discusses long-term effects on surviving generation of children that would have witnessed the events and how many of them would never recover emotionally from the trauma of seeing all these things. The film concludes with the statement that the current stockpile at that time of nuclear weapons was enough explosives to equal 20 tons for every single human being on the planet. Synopsis for the next film, The Day After. It was a movie made in 1983. It was written by Edward Hume, produced by Robert Papazian, and directed by Nicholas Meyer. It was a made-for-TV movie that aired on ABC on November 20th, 1983. One interesting fact for this film was that it was even broadcast in the Soviet Union in 1987. It's a mostly fictional story of a war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union's forces that escalates quickly into a nuclear weapon exchange. The focus is on small towns surrounding Kansas City and Lawrence, Kansas, specifically homesteads and farms that are directly adjacent to nuclear missile silos. The film starts out by showing small-town Americans going about their daily lives. Commentary on the state of the world is displayed or shown through radio and television news reports. Then cuts to a special news bulletin announcing a breakout of conflict between NATO forces and Eastern Berlin. Soviet forces quickly establish a blockade in Berlin and then proceed to invade West Germany. Citizens are warned to begin preparing for potential attacks, and we see people stockpiling water and panicking at grocery stores. One thing I found funny in the scene at the grocery store is no one has toilet paper in their shopping carts. There's then another news report that the U.S. forces used atomic weapons on the Soviet troops in Western Germany, which the Soviets quickly respond by sending a nuclear bomb to NATO headquarters. This is followed up by the U.S. launching all their Minuteman missiles from the KC and surrounding areas before the Soviets have a chance to destroy them. This alerts most of the main characters in the show that they need to get to shelter immediately because Soviet attack is incoming. And of course, the Soviet nuclear bomb does detonate an airburst over the KC metro area. This is followed by an EMP blast that knocks out everything electrical within a certain radius and leaves many people stranded on highways and out in the open. Most of the characters admit that they don't know anything about radiation. All they know is that they need to hunker down and stay indoors until some sort of all clear is given. The next part of the film focuses on the KU Med Center and the doctors trying to reestablish control there and help those who can be helped. Those stranded outside attempt to try to find supplies and protection and try to avoid anybody that has weapons. Those in the shelter keep trying to establish contact with the outside world to try to figure out what's going on in the rest of the world. Once the all clear is given, people start to go outdoors again. Body disposal becomes a major issue because they need to bury or burn all the bodies to prevent the spread of disease. The government also tries to reestablish rationing of food and other supplies, but the trucks are quickly overrun by desperate people. Near the end of this film, there are just scenes of dead and dying everywhere. One of the doctors from the KU Med Center, who was kind of the main focus guy for that, finally determines that he's going to die from his radiation poisoning, so the last thing he wants to do is go to his home in the KC metro area to try to see if his wife survived. When he eventually gets there, he sees nothing but a barren wasteland. He does miraculously somehow find the ruins of his home and finds survivors in there who he initially tries to scare away, but they end up offering him food, and he feels like there's some humanity left in the world. Next, I'd like to talk about comparisons and contrast between the two films. Both films focus on small town life, government intervention, and doctors dealing with survivors. They both involve U.S. and Soviet forces using escalating levels of force as retaliation against one another. They both show terrifying effects on the human body and mind during the varying stages of nuclear attack. They show a general lack of understanding of the effects and dangers of radiation. They both show the reality of life following the use of nuclear warfare. They show government trying to reestablish some sort of order to help survivors, and they both show dead and dying everywhere. In contrast, The War Game was made in 1965, towards the beginning of the Cold War. The Day After was filmed in 1983, near the end of the Cold War. The War Game uses no actors. The Day After uses well-known actors. The War Game is a BBC film. Day After is an American film for the ABC. The War Game's filmed predominantly in Dover, Kent, and other small English towns, whereas The Day After is filmed in Casey, Lawrence, and homes and farmsteads. War Game, the government organizes mandates of necessary supplies that would be necessary before, during, and after an attack. And in The Day After, we see chaos and panic buying at grocery stores. So what is the goal or theme that both the filmmakers were trying to portray? I feel like for The Day After, the main theme is that there's ignorance among most of the people in the film about what radiation actually does, the effects that it has, and just how devastating it would be in the event that a nuclear attack was used. And so I feel like towards the end of the Cold War, people may not have a realistic view of what a nuclear attack means, and so this film is trying to re-educate them and make them care. For The War Game, I found an interesting interview with Peter Watkins. Basically, he was trying to show reality versus what the media was kind of portraying nuclear war to be about. So in conclusion, what I feel like both of these films were trying to say about the Cold War was, one, that the average person doesn't know much about the realities of nuclear war and a nuclear attack and what it would mean as far as their personal lives and how it would affect life thereafter, and how crazy things would be and chaotic, and how basically there would be an end to life as we know it. And so I feel like both of these films were trying to educate people towards that and show how crazy and how close things were to becoming reality compared to what they were showing in their films in real life if measures weren't taken to de-escalate things between the superpowers. Thank you.